Strzelać tylko na moją komendę.
Strzelać na wyraźną komendę. Ognia!
In 1939, on a Polish island in the midst of the turmoil of the Second World War, Major Henryk received an urgent summons to see Colonel Sobozinski. The colonel brought important news. The High Command had issued orders for their troops to move south. Poland was only days away from facing the Germans in a major battle. Not only that, Colonel Sobozinski also said that Major Henryk would have to defend their position for 12 hours, supported by 200 available soldiers. After that time had passed, all decisions were in Henryk's hands. Such a sudden order took him by surprise, but the increasingly volatile situation left no room for doubt.
Jest to rozkaz naczelnego dowództwa.
Albo na przykład 24?
Stał. A potem możesz podjąć... Sytuacja jest zła. Masz wytrzymać 12 godzin i bas każdą decyzję.
As soon as the colonel left, Captain Cuba arrived with an urgent report the Germans had surrounded the city of Gdansk and cut off access to their medical transportation.
Jeśli z nami zaczną, to pożałują tego na pewno.
If war did break out, their troops would be in critical condition without adequate medical supplies. The days passed in suspense. Henryk and his troops filled the time by working together to strengthen the defenses and make sure all preparations were complete. Until finally, on September 1st, 1939, German troops launched a massive attack on Fort Westerplatte. On the defense line, a soldier named Griezmann immediately sent a warning signal. Kuba, who was in the center of the barracks, immediately ordered the troops to prepare. "We must not retreat. Fight them when they penetrate our territory," he exclaimed loudly. Mortar attacks continued to rain down on their defenses, forcing the soldiers to rush to their posts. Captain Cuba, alertly, continued to lead the troop movements, directing them towards the designated defense points. Vigilantly, he kept moving, making sure everything went according to plan, while the roar of war began to shake their fortress. Amidst the roar of battle, the Polish soldiers immediately raised their heavy weapons, preparing to counterattack. As the Germans continued to advance, they didn't realize that Polish soldiers had been hiding at various strategic points, waiting for the right moment to ambush. When the enemy was close enough, they opened fire simultaneously, creating chaos in the opposing ranks.
Strzelać tylko na moją komendę.
Strzelać na wyraźną komendę. Ognia!
On the coastal side, one group managed to drive off a sizable number of German troops, forcing them to retreat to their original positions. However, the situation changed drastically when German warships began to launch artillery fire. The cannon blasts devastated various points of the Polish defenses, ravaging their buildings and strategic positions. The advantage that had been in Polish hands slowly disappeared, forcing them to retreat under duress. Some soldiers were even forced to abandon their weapons to save their lives. Not long after, Warsaw Radio broke the shocking news: German troops had crossed the Polish border, in blatant violation of the peace treaty. Not only that, enemy planes bombarded major cities, destroying infrastructure and paralyzing all public activity.
Nareszcie damy po krzyżach tym łajdakom.
As the chaos continued, the Germans launched another ground attack. However, before they could break through the defense lines, the Polish army was relentless in blocking them. A hail of bullets hit the German lines, forcing them to retreat again. Unfortunately, this time the battle took its toll. One Polish soldier died on the battlefield. On the other hand, a soldier named Ferry was sent to reinforce Sector 1, the area that was currently the most dangerous point. However, Ferry didn't seem to accept the assignment. In a state of uncontrollable emotion, he activated an explosive without calculating the safe distance. The explosion hit one of his colleagues who was still busy laying mines, causing the situation to become even more chaotic. The increasingly fierce battle claimed more casualties. 3 soldiers were killed on the spot, while 3 others were seriously wounded, with several others suffering only minor injuries. Things were getting precarious. The seriously wounded soldiers needed immediate surgeons. Some of them had lost a lot of blood, with one soldier suffering a fatal wound to the groin. This news shook the morale of the troops, making the tension on the battlefield even more tense.
Kuba, ja zrobię co będę mógł, tylko błagam was, no zrozumcie, że...
Not long after, Major Henrik received a phone call from someone named Butler. Butler proposed to mobilize his troops to retake the lost positions. However, Henrik strictly forbade him from making an open attack, considering that they had lost many soldiers in the trenches. With the situation becoming increasingly critical, Henrik ordered the troops to retreat to the west, while appointing Griezmann as the new commander. This decision was clearly against the wishes of the Cubans, who felt Henrik's strategy was not aggressive enough, while Butler also seemed furious with the order. Time ticked away, until finally 12 hours had passed. According to their calculations, the reinforcements should have arrived. However, when the order arrived, it was far from what they expected. Reinforcements would not be sent until the next day. The news caused morale to falter, while the situation on the battlefield worsened.
Może to pomóc?
Nie, gdyby mogli, to by już...
The following morning, the Germans again pushed for the coast. However, they were blocked by barbed wire and booby traps, which made it easier for the Polish troops to counterattack. Meanwhile, in the middle of a firefight, some Polish soldiers were startled by the rumbling sound of an approaching airplane. At first, they thought it was an Allied plane coming to bring reinforcements. However, that assumption was soon shattered when they realized that the plane was carrying a sluggish. Soon, 8 German fighter planes appeared in the sky and immediately pounded the fort with bombs dropped in rapid succession. The devastating explosions leveled many buildings without giving them a chance to fight back. This devastating air raid not only weakened their defenses, but also mentally shook the entire Polish army. Amidst the devastation, differences of opinion began to emerge among the officers. Butler insisted that they keep fighting, despite the increasingly unfavorable situation.
Weź się w garść, stary.
Meanwhile, Cuba received reports that the German troops had reached the gates of the fortress, and their defense was no longer possible. Knowing the gravity of the situation, Henrik finally ordered his troops to burn all important documents and prepare to surrender. However, before the white flag could be raised, Cuba swiftly stopped one of the soldiers who was about to surrender. In a state of emotion and desperation, Cuba was even forced to shoot the soldier to prevent him from raising the surrender sign. Cuba walked up to Henrik and emotionally threw a white flag at him. However, instead of responding, Henrik suddenly had a violent seizure. The flying ash and dust from the previous explosion seemed to have gotten into his respiratory tract. After being treated by the medical team, doctors diagnosed that Henrik was having an epileptic seizure. With his condition worsening, the reins of command now passed into the hands of another officer. Later that evening, the Germans launched another surprise attack. However, the Polish troops who had been on standby opened fire, forcing them to retreat. Meanwhile, Henrik was recovering from his critical period, but his mind seemed unstable. The trauma of the battle that had claimed the lives of many of his troops caused him to experience increasingly severe hallucinations, signaling how his psyche was reeling from the war that continued to rage. The next morning, Cuba came to Henrik with the latest report. German forces were now attacking from the sea. Based on the information received, it was expected that they would conduct a massive landing operation today. However, Henrik, who was still not fully recovered, did not seem to take the report seriously, making Cuba even more frustrated with the increasingly difficult situation. Amidst the chaos, an urgent message arrived. Several key cities in Poland had fallen to the Germans. However, there was one piece of news that brought a ray of hope. France and Britain had officially declared war on Germany. Hearing the news, the Polish troops' spirits were lifted a little. They felt that they were no longer fighting alone, but standing with the great powers of Europe. However, the relentlessness of the war further eroded the endurance of the Polish troops. the exhaustion made their morale decline. Some soldiers began to lose hope and get frustrated. One of them even desperately tried to stab Butler in an unstable mental state. Butler quickly caught him and ordered the soldier to be tied up for everyone's safety. Seeing his soldiers treated like that, Griezmann, who was also depressed by the situation, became angry. An argument ensued, and in a fit of rage, the dispute between them turned into a fistfight. However, in the midst of the fight, they were completely unaware that German troops had approached their position secretly. Cuba, realizing the danger, immediately shouted orders to prepare for enemy attacks. The battle broke out again. After that, Cuba, with a face full of anger, reprimanded all those involved in the previous quarrel. With a stern voice, he warned them that if a similar incident occurred again, he would not hesitate to take harsh action. As the Polish troops were patrolling, they were suddenly ambushed by gunfire from a post hidden behind the ruins. Without thinking, they immediately returned fire, believing the attackers to be German troops. However, in the midst of the firefight, the soldiers inside the post began to signal that they were fellow Poles. When they finally came out of hiding, the reason behind their actions was revealed: they actually wanted to escape the battlefield. Feeling betrayed, Cuba decided that this mistake could not be tolerated. With a firm voice, he issued an execution order for the defectors. Although heavy-hearted, Riziki carried out the order and brought the 3 soldiers to the beach to be executed. However, before the execution was carried out, the German troops launched a surprise attack. In panic, the 3 soldiers who were about to be executed spontaneously tried to escape. Without hesitation, they were immediately shot dead. After the incident, Riziki could only be silent in deep regret.
Podnieś to.
His heart was overwhelmed with guilt for taking the lives of 3 of his own colleagues. More than that, he began to feel that their struggle was in vain, because in the end, the Polish troops would definitely lose. The next day, Cuba reported important news to Henrik. Aid from England and France was expected to arrive by the evening. However, instead of feeling relieved, Henrik was disappointed with Cuba's decision to act without his permission, especially in executing 3 soldiers who, in his opinion, did not deserve to die in such a way. However, Cuba remained firm in his stance. For him, they died because they were supposed to.
Bo wtedy byłby koniec.
Hearing the argument, Henrik went to the doctor and handed over a handful of soil he had brought from his hometown. He told him that if he died on the battlefield, the soil would be buried with him. On the other hand, the doctor delivered a more gruesome report. Ledek, one of the Polish officers, had issued an order to execute all wounded soldiers so that they would no longer be a burden on the defense line. Cuba was already aware of the order, but in his heart, he would rather see them die fighting than surrender to the enemy.
Zabrał wszystkich oficerów wieczorem. Zwołuje naradę.
As night fell, the Germans again appeared to attack. However, this time they didn't come with tanks or warplanes like before. Instead, they deployed something far more surprising, an armored train that sped straight towards the Polish defenses. Realizing the imminent danger, the Polish troops acted quickly, looking for a way to stop the train carrying fuel tanks before it was too late.
Żadnej kapitulacji.
But the situation on the Polish defense line was getting precarious. In a meeting with the platoon leaders, it was decided that they would surrender the next day. The decision was made because most of the defense posts were surrounded and the troops were increasingly pressed. Even so, Cuba still insisted on refusing to surrender. He was convinced that there was still hope to survive and continue to fight. The next day, Henrik learned that Cuba had deliberately defied his orders to send replacement troops. Feeling that this betrayal could not be tolerated, Henrik made sure that if the war ended, Cuba would be court-martialed for its actions. However, the battle was not over. Attack after attack continued to hit their strongholds, but the Polish troops fought tooth and nail to hold their positions. In the midst of an increasingly uncontrollable situation, Henrik held another meeting with the officers. This time, he emphasized that the decision to surrender was final. It was the only way to save the survivors. Again, Cuba refused. In a fit of rage, he exclaimed that he would rather die than surrender. He even asked to be executed rather than live as a coward.
Decyzja może być tylko jedna.
Znam swój obowiązek.
The seventh day arrived. The Germans were closing in, pounding them with more brutal attacks than ever before. Although the Poles were still holding out, the casualties were mounting, and the wounded soldiers were increasingly in need of medical assistance. Amidst a hail of bullets and explosions, Henrik finally summoned the entire army to deliver the inevitable decision they would surrender. Cuba, with a broken heart, begged Henrik to rescind the order. But for Henrik, their struggle had reached its limit. It was not a matter of bravery or cowardice, but rather the safety of the remaining soldiers. With a heavy heart, the decision was announced to the entire division. On September 7, 1939, Poland officially surrendered to Germany. Although many still could not accept this harsh reality, in the end they realized that surrender was the only way to end their suffering.